That night, Ethan Cole sat quietly in his car, engine off, lights out, parked in the lot outside his house. Seattle's light drizzle fell against the windshield, forming thin streams of water that stretched downward like scratches. He was not the kind of man who imagined things or wrote tragedies in his head. Ethan was the type of man whose life was divided into columns: work, family, bills, the kids' pickup schedules, and all the small routines that kept everything from falling apart. But something had dropped onto his phone at 11:47 p.m., and it did not feel like spam, it did not feel like a joke. A message from an unknown number. "Ethan, you still think your wife is just going to work. You're lying to yourself." Ethan read it twice, then a third time. No name, no explanation. Just a sentence as sharp as a blade, cutting straight into the softest part of a man who was used to being in control. He had heard enough stories about broken marriages, friends getting divorced, co-workers cheating, the kind of stories people told in bars after work, but Ethan had never believed his life would turn into that kind of alleyway. He had always trusted that if a life was stable enough, it would be protected by its own stability. Inside the house, the kitchen light was still on. That meant Lena was still awake, or she had forgotten again, like she often did. Ivy was probably asleep. Noah always wore his headphones and disappeared into his gaming world. Madison was studying in California and would not be home for a few more weeks. From the outside, they looked like the model American family. A 2-story house in the suburbs, a garage with 2 cars, a refrigerator covered with school schedules, shopping lists, and a family photo from Oregon's beach last year, all of them smiling brightly as if nothing could ever reach them. Ethan entered through the garage door, hung his keys on the hook exactly where they belonged, out of habit. The scent of fabric softener drifted from the laundry room, the kind of clean laundry smell Americans loved, pleasant but strangely cold. He walked past the living room and saw Noah stretched out on the sofa, holding a game controller, the TV glowing blue. Noah looked up, gave a small nod, then went right back to the game. The boy wore indifference like armor. "You're still up?" Ethan asked, voice normal. "Yeah," Noah replied, eyes still on the screen. Ethan did not push. He was already used to kids growing up and closing doors. He simply walked into the kitchen. Lena stood with her back to him, loading dishes into the dishwasher. An oversized t-shirt, black leggings, her hair loosely tied up. She looked like she did every day, but if you looked closely, something was slightly different. She was humming a small tune, very softly. Something that rarely happened in recent years. "You're home late?" Lena said without turning around. "The meeting ran long," Ethan replied. He opened the cabinet, took a glass, poured water. He wanted to ask about the message, but he did not want to throw it like a direct hit into the middle of the kitchen. Ethan was not the type of man who yelled or broke things. He hated drama. He hated the feeling of losing dignity, and more than anything, he hated the idea of the kids hearing. Lena closed the dishwasher and turned around. Under the kitchen light, Ethan noticed her lipstick was slightly darker than usual, just a little. Not bright red like for a party, but enough to make him realize he had missed something. "I have an early shift tomorrow," Lena said calmly. "Yeah," Ethan nodded. He watched her. The way she avoided holding eye contact too long. The way she touched her wrist lightly as if remembering whether she was wearing something. A different perfume drifted past, not strong, but clearly there. It was not the kind she usually wore. Ethan did not need to be a detective to feel a crack forming inside their normal. He raised the glass to his mouth but did not drink. Instead, he asked a question indirectly, like a man trying to touch the iceberg with his fingertip. "Are you doing okay lately?" Lena smiled too fast, too quickly. "Of course. Why are you asking?" Ethan shrugged, just asking. Lena looked at him for one more second, then turned away to grab a towel. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed first." "Okay." She walked past him, and the unfamiliar perfume swept by again, like someone had opened a door into another world and shut it immediately. Ethan stood still, listening to her footsteps upstairs, listening to the bedroom door close, and hearing something inside him sink. The signs had existed before. Ethan had simply been too busy to connect them. A week earlier, Ivy had asked Lena a simple question when she saw her mother carrying shopping bags home. "Mom, did you buy new clothes?" Lena replied that she wanted to change things up a little for fun. Ivy said nothing more, but she had seen a tight cream-colored dress shoved quickly into the room. It was not Lena's usual style. Lena typically chose loose sweaters, simple jeans, safe things. Then there was the red lipstick inside the bathroom drawer. Ivy found it while searching for a hair clip. The girl held it in her palm for a long moment, like holding evidence. Her mother almost never wore bold makeup, and the new perfume, it appeared in the hallway from time to time on exactly the days Lena was going to work. Ivy was not the kind of child who made up stories, but she had a sensitivity that adults often forgot children possessed. Kids could hear the things adults did not say. Ivy began watching more carefully. She watched her mother smile to herself while texting, then immediately lock the screen. She watched her mother leave earlier than usual, with her hair more neatly styled, her coat chosen more carefully, and she watched her father remain trapped inside his old trust as if that trust was part of who he was. As for Ethan, the man who loved order, he still believed everything was just a phase. Long marriages always had cold seasons. He told himself that again and again. He even told friends the same thing when they complained about their spouses. He believed that if there was no shouting, no violence, no scandal, then everything must be fine. But that night, the strange message planted a seed, and it landed in soil already marked by suspicion. Ethan climbed the stairs slowly and stopped outside Ivy's room. The door was slightly open, the star-shaped nightlight still on. Ivy slept on her side, hugging her pillow, her hair spilling like ink. Looking at his daughter, Ethan felt a simmering anger rise, not anger toward Lena, not anger toward some unnamed person, but anger at the possibility that this family could be destroyed by a secret. He closed Ivy's door gently and walked to the small home office. On the desk sat a laptop, paperwork, and an unopened white envelope, the statement for Lena's secondary card that the bank had emailed, which Ethan printed earlier that afternoon, planning to review later. He had postponed it the way people postpone a bad feeling. Ethan sat down, placed the envelope in front of him, and for the first time in his life, the man who always controlled everything felt his hands trembling slightly. Upstairs, Lena lay still in the bedroom, facing the wall. Her eyes were closed, but she was not asleep. In her mind, a question pricked like a needle. Had Ethan already found out? And Ivy, in the next room, continued sleeping, unaware that a very ordinary night in a Seattle family was beginning to shift. There was no screaming, no thunder, only an unopened envelope, a message from an unknown number, and a husband standing at the moment that would decide the rest of his life. Ethan Cole did not unopen the envelope immediately. He left it lying on the desk like an object that could explode if touched the wrong way. In that small room at the end of the hallway where he usually handled the family budget, real estate contracts, and the company's endless spreadsheets, everything was organized to a cold perfection. A printer pushed tight against the wall. A stack of files clipped straight. Pens always placed in their exact spot on the holder. That was how Ethan lived. If everything stayed in its place, life would be less messy. But that white envelope did not belong to his system. Upstairs, Lena stayed silent. The house settled into a hush, filled only with the dishwasher's low hum and the soft sound of Noah laughing in the living room when his game won another round. Ivy slept, hugging her pillow, unaware that her father was sitting face to face with something that could split the word family in half. In the end, Ethan tore the envelope open, slowly, carefully. Lena's secondary card statement appeared as neat, emotionless printed lines. Numbers, dates, locations. It did not accuse anyone. It simply recorded the truth, and the truth rarely needed to raise its voice. The first line made Ethan frown. Bellevue Harbor Dining, $214.80, Tuesday, 1:16 p.m. Bellevue. That lakefront restaurant everyone talked about, the kind of place Ethan's colleagues bragged about when they treated a client. Not a place for a busy wife working early shifts at a private hospital to grab lunch alone in the middle of the week. Ethan scrolled downward. Rose and Stem Florist, $89.50, Monday, 3:42 p.m. That flower shop was more than a 20-minute drive away, toward downtown. Ethan knew because he had ordered flowers there once, 10 years ago, when Lena gave birth to Noah, and he wanted to do something rare and romantic. He remembered clearly how Lena smiled when she had received the white bouquet. That smile had been real. Now, that printed line felt like someone reminding him that the things that once belonged to him could already belong to someone else. Ethan was not the type to get jealous in a reckless way. He was not the kind of man to punch walls or demand answers in the middle of the night. He only felt something drop straight into his stomach, cold and heavy, making his body react before his mind could catch up. He kept reading. Ride share, $37.20, Thursday, 9:58 p.m. Ride share, $31.60. Friday, 10:21 p.m. Lingerie boutique, $146.00, Saturday, 4:09 p.m. Ethan stopped at the last line, as if a needle had pricked his eyes. Lena was not someone who bought things like that. For years, she'd always chosen comfort, t-shirts, cardigans, sneakers. If she needed to dress up, she picked modest dresses in neutral colors. That line, Lingerie boutique, slapped him in the face like a soft punch. He leaned back in the chair and breathed out slowly. His whole body suddenly felt hot, but his palms were cold. The signs Ivy had mentioned were no longer a vague feeling. They had become a pattern. And Ethan was the kind of man who was best at seeing patterns. He lifted his head and looked out the window. Seattle's rain was not heavy, but it never stopped. The streetlight's yellow glow reflected on the glass, showing the shape of him sitting alone. A 45-year-old man, silver starting at the temples, still wearing his office shirt, looking like someone whose ground had been pulled out from under him, yet still forcing himself to sit upright. In the bedroom, Lena still lay facing the wall. She stayed quiet too long, the kind of silence that happens when you hear your own heart beating louder than usual. The truth was, Lena could not sleep either. She did not know whether Ethan had received that message. But she could sense a tiny shift in the air, like the moment before a storm, when birds stop singing and people instinctively know they should shut the windows. Ethan folded the statement, slid it back into the envelope, and put it into a drawer. Not because he wanted to deny it, but because he needed time. Ethan did not act on emotion. He acted on plans. He needed to know what the next step was before he destroyed anything. The next morning, he still woke at the exact time, 5:50 a.m. He made coffee in the French press like always. He toasted bread and spread peanut butter for Noah. He cut fruit for Ivy. The automatic actions of a father. Except, this time, every movement carried stiffness, as if his body was acting out normal to keep everything from collapsing right in front of the kids. Noah walked through the kitchen, yawning, putting on his headphones. "Dad," Noah said, short and flat. Ethan nodded. "Eat breakfast." Noah grabbed the toast and ate while staring at his phone. He did not notice anything, or maybe he noticed and chose not to look. Ivy came downstairs next, wearing a gray hoodie, hair tied up. When she saw her father, Ivy paused for half a beat, as if checking his expression. Ethan looked at his youngest daughter and his eyes softened slightly. Ivy always had a way of making Ethan feel understood even when he said nothing, and that was both comfort and pain. Lena appeared last. She wore a white blouse, a light coat, her bag over her shoulder. A faint trace of perfume drifted through the air. Ivy looked down, then looked up. Ethan looked at his wife. Not long, only long enough to remind himself that this was the woman he had lived with for more than 2 decades. "I'm leaving," Lena said. "Yeah," Ethan replied. Calm in a way that felt frightening. Lena bent down and kissed Ivy's forehead. "Study hard, sweetheart." Ivy nodded, but her eyes still watched Lena like she was reading words that were not written. When Lena left the house and the door clicked shut, Ethan stood still for a few seconds. Then he turned to Ivy. "Do you have time to talk for a minute?" Ethan asked gently, like he was asking about homework. Ivy put her backpack down and looked straight at him. No fear, no avoiding. "Ask me," Ivy said, her voice steady. Ethan swallowed. He did not want to drag his daughter into adult problems. But the truth was, Ivy had been there from the beginning. And Ivy was the only piece he could trust without worrying it had been twisted. "Have you noticed Mom acting different lately?" Ethan asked. Ivy did not look surprised. She let out a very small breath, like she had been waiting for him to say it. "Yes," Ivy answered immediately. "I know you see it too." Ethan did not respond, but his eyes changed. Ivy continued, each sentence clear. "Mom bought a new dress, the tight one. I saw it in the laundry basket. She has red lipstick. I saw new perfume too." Mom smiles at her phone, then locks the screen. "And one day, I heard Mom talking quietly in the kitchen, like she was calling someone. I couldn't hear clearly, but I heard her laughing." The word laughing hurt Ethan more than any charge on the statement. Ethan nodded slowly. He tried to keep his face normal, but in his mind everything began aligning into a picture no one wanted to see. He reached out and gently rubbed Ivy's hair. "Thank you," Ethan said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You don't have to worry." Ivy looked at him, her eyes slightly red, but she did not cry. "Dad, is Mom going to leave us?" Ivy asked, her voice smaller. Ethan heard that question like glass cracking. He wanted to say no. He wanted to promise everything would be fine, but he could not lie to his daughter. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly, "but I won't let you go through it alone." Ivy nodded, then suddenly hugged him. A fast hug, but tight, like she was holding on to the only thing still certain. Ethan hugged her back, his throat tightening. When Ivy pulled away, Ethan watched her run upstairs to grab her jacket. He stood alone in the kitchen, between the smell of coffee and the ticking wall clock. Inside Ethan's jacket pocket, his phone vibrated softly. Another message from the unknown number. "You have the statement now, right? Don't let her twist it." Ethan stared at the screen. His heart hammered. So the sender was not guessing. The sender knew, and that meant this story was not only Lena's mistake. It was a secret that had existed long enough for an outsider to decide to interfere. Ethan lifted his head and looked at the door Lena had just walked out of. A chill ran down his spine. He did not know who was playing this game, but he knew one thing. Starting today, he would no longer be the blind man who believed everything was fine. And once Ethan Cole began investigating a problem, he would go all the way to the end. Ethan Cole did not reply to the message. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned the phone off and slipped it back into his pocket as if it were only a warning sent to the wrong person. But the cold feeling along his spine did not go away. The sender knew about the statement, not only knew, but seemed to be watching how Ethan reacted, as if waiting for him to step into a trap that had already been set. Ethan was not afraid of being deceived. He was afraid of being controlled. And if there was one thing a man like Ethan hated more than betrayal, it was losing control over his own life. That morning, after dropping Ivy off at school, a public school 7 minutes from home with a baseball field and an American flag hanging still in the light rain, Ethan did not drive straight to the office like he normally did. He turned onto the freeway and headed toward downtown Seattle. glass buildings appeared blurred through the mist. This city always looked like it was holding secrets, even in broad daylight. He drove without music, without calls, only the tires whispering over the wet road and the steady rhythm of the wipers. Ethan's thoughts were tangled but not chaotic. It felt like a spreadsheet that had just been spilled on. The numbers were still there, but it took time to read them correctly again. He parked near an old office building with 1980s architecture, not luxurious but discreet. A sign hung by the entrance. Harding and Mueller. Family law. Ethan's lawyer was not a stranger. Martin Harding had handled a colleague's divorce 4 years earlier. A loud case full of accusations, assets divided like paper being ripped apart. Ethan had heard the story in the break room with the smell of burnt coffee. And at that time he had thought, how could people turn someone they once loved into an enemy so quickly? Now, Ethan stood in front of that office door, his hand on the handle, realizing life never asked whether you were ready. Inside, wall-wide, the office smelled like old paper and varnished wood. A plant sat by the window, and a few family photos were displayed on the receptionist's desk. The quiet here was not the quiet of love, but the quiet of separation. Martin Harding was in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes, but a calm voice like someone who had seen too many tears to be surprised anymore. He shook Ethan's hand and pulled out a chair. Ethan Cole. Last time I saw you was at Techline's company party last year, right? Ethan nodded. Yes. Martin studied Ethan's face. What happened? Ethan did not circle around it. I need to prepare paperwork. Martin raised his eyebrows slightly, just enough to show he understood without judging. Divorce? Ethan sat straight. I didn't say I'm filing yet, but I need to be ready. I want 3 things. A separation agreement, a postnuptial agreement, and a complete divorce file. Martin was silent for a few seconds. He did not ask about feelings. He asked about reality. You suspect your wife is having an affair? Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked out the window where rain dotted the glass like dust. I have signs. And I have financial evidence, Ethan said. But I don't want to turn my home into a battlefield. I want to do everything quietly. Martin nodded seriously. All right, but understand this. Quiet doesn't mean easy. If she reacts, she may turn this into a war. Ethan looked straight at him. I know. Martin pulled out an empty file folder and began taking notes. Marital assets, separate assets, house, cars, bank accounts. And is there anything I should be aware of? Ethan paused. This was the part he rarely shared, even with Lena. He spoke slowly. I have a separate investment portfolio. Real estate, some stocks. It started a long time ago. I'm not hiding it from her, but she has never really cared. Martin looked up. Approximately how much? Ethan did not brag. He said the number the way he would in a report. About 7 figures. I can be called a millionaire in the way banks define it. Martin did not look shocked. He nodded as if he had expected it. Then the postnup is extremely important. It can protect that part of your assets depending on how we structure it. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. For 23 years he had used discipline to raise this family. He believed in fairness. But now he was sitting here to protect what he had built from the very woman who had once shared his bed. The world could be cruel. Martin continued. The kids? Ethan answered with a father's instinct. I don't want them dragged into this. I want stability for Ivy and Noah. Madison is far away. Martin leaned back and exhaled. You have a logical mind. But Ethan, I'll be honest, you're not only preparing paperwork, you're preparing for an emotion you haven't truly allowed yourself to feel yet. Ethan did not respond because he was right. On the way back, Ethan stopped at a small coffee shop in Pioneer Square. He ordered a latte like always, but could not finish half of it. People around him laughed, typed on laptops, talked about startups, about the Seahawks, about weekend hikes. Life still moved, as if no one knew there was a hole opening inside Ethan's chest. He checked his phone. No new message from the unknown number. But that absence did not calm him. It felt like a predator pausing, letting the prey step forward on its own. Ethan returned home before Lena got back. He walked around the house like a guest. The living room still smelled of air freshener. On the kitchen counter was a grocery list. Milk, eggs, cereal for Noah, snacks for Ivy. Everything looked normal in a way that felt cruel. On the fridge, a family photo was held in place by a magnet. Lena stood beside Ethan, her hand resting on Ivy's shoulder. Her smile in that photo was not fake, it was real. Ethan knew because he had lived long enough to tell the difference between a real smile and a polite one. So, how could someone be real and still betray you? He went upstairs and opened the drawer where Lena kept random things. Hair clips, a few necklaces, moisturizer. Ethan was not a man who searched through belongings, but he was not a fool either. At the bottom of the drawer, he found a small receipt folded in half. The name printed at the top was Bellevue Harbor Dining, the exact date and time from the statement. And in the corner of the paper there was a tiny handwritten note, like something someone wrote quickly. D. Table by the window. Ethan held the receipt in his hand and did not move. That single letter D felt like a period at the end of everything. Derek. So none of this was imagination. Downstairs, Noah still held his game controller. Gunfire sounds echoing from the TV. Ivy had not come home yet. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom holding a receipt as small as a pebble, yet heavy enough to collapse an entire house. He folded the receipt and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He did not explode. He did not scream. He did not throw anything. Ethan Cole did not react like a man out of control. He reacted like a man rebuilding a battle line. When evening came, Ethan sat in the home office and opened his laptop. He created a new folder. He named it with a single word: Truth. Inside, he scanned the statement, scanned the receipt, and wrote down dates and times. He was not a detective, but he was a CFO, and a CFO did not work from instincts. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The porch light turned on, and when Ethan heard Lena's car pulling into the driveway, he closed the laptop slowly, like locking away a weapon. Lena walked in, hung up her coat, still calm, still playing the role of the wife. "You're home early," Lena said. Ethan looked at her with eyes so peaceful no one could read what was inside. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "I wasn't busy today." Lena smiled faintly. "I'll cook something." Ethan nodded, saying nothing more. But in his mind he already saw 3 envelopes lying on the bed, and the one question he would ask. He would not give Lena time to twist anything, not give the secret any more time, because he understood that once a marriage began to crack, whoever controlled the truth would control everything that came next. And Ethan Cole had just decided he would be that person. Throughout dinner that night, Ethan Cole could barely taste the food. Lena made pan-seared salmon with salad and roasted potatoes, a classic American family meal she always cooked whenever she wanted everything to look neat and under control. Noah sat at the table, but his eyes stayed glued to his phone. Ivy talked about school, a science quiz, a friend who got caught cheating, her voice brighter than usual, as if she were trying to inject oxygen into a house that could barely breathe. Lena laughed a few times. She asked Ivy about homework. She reminded Noah not to eat too fast. Everything looked completely normal if Ethan had not been watching the small details. The way Lena placed her phone face down on the table, like she was afraid the screen might light up. The way she blinked faster whenever Ethan looked straight at her. The way the unfamiliar perfume still clung to her collar even though she had showered. Ethan sat there holding his fork, feeling like a man replaying security footage of his own life. Every frame showing Lena, yet the most important thing always happening just outside the screen. When dinner ended, Noah stood up first. "I'm going upstairs," he said, putting his headphones on like he was locking a door. Ivy helped her mother clear a few plates, but her eyes kept flicking toward Ethan. She looked at her father as if asking, "What are you going to do?" Ethan did not answer with words. He simply placed a hand lightly on Ivy's shoulder, a small touch but unmistakable. "Go to bed. The rest is on me." "Go upstairs, Ivy," Ethan said calmly. Ivy hesitated for a beat. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at his youngest daughter, his eyes softening for one brief moment. "I'm okay," he said. "Go sleep. You have school tomorrow." Ivy nodded and walked slowly up the stairs. She did not turn back, but her heart carried a weight that did not belong to her age. Lena stood at the sink rinsing dishes, the running water covering the silence. She did not ask Ethan why he was so quiet today. She had grown used to Ethan going through stressful phases at work, and maybe she was hoping this was just another day like any other. But Ethan did not give her more time. He stood up and walked toward the stairs. Not fast, not rushed. The steps of a man who had already reached a decision. "Lena," Ethan called. She turned. "Yeah?" "Upstairs," Ethan said. "I want to talk." His voice was not loud, but it was enough to make Lena stop. Part of her recognized the difference. Ethan did not say, "Can you come up for a second?" Ethan spoke like a man announcing a court session with a set time. Lena wiped her hands on a towel, trying to keep a small smile. "Now? What is it?" Ethan looked straight at her. "Something." She nodded and followed him upstairs. The hallway on the second floor was darker than the kitchen below. The warm yellow light made everything feel like a dream. The bedroom door was open. A faint candle scent still lingered, the kind Lena loved to burn to make the house feel warm. Ethan used to think it meant she was still trying to hold the family together. Now, he was no longer sure. Inside the bedroom, Ethan had already prepared everything. On the bed, right in the middle of the white blanket, 3 brown envelopes lay side by side. No decoration, no names. But just looking at them was enough to understand they were serious documents. Lena stepped into the room, and her eyes locked onto the 3 envelopes like she had just seen the one thing she never wanted to see. She froze at the doorway. "What is that?" Lena asked, her voice dry. Ethan closed the door behind him, slowly. "Sit down," he said. Lena did not sit. She took 2 steps forward, stared closer, and her face changed, all color draining away. Her eyes skimmed the lines of text barely showing at the envelope openings, as if she were trying to read them while still wishing it was only a misunderstanding. Ethan stood across from her, arms folded. His heart was pounding, but his face showed nothing. He had spent his entire life controlling high-pressure meetings and multi-million-dollar deals. He would not let emotion drive him. Not tonight. "There's something I need to know," Ethan said. "Is there someone else?" The question dropped into the bedroom like a heavy stone. Lena blinked rapidly, then tried to smile, a broken smile like someone trying to tape a crack shut. "What are you talking about?" she asked softly, forcing normal. "What's wrong with you?" Ethan did not move. Answer. Lena looked into his eyes, and in that moment she understood this was not a random jealous outburst. This was not Ethan listening to gossip. Ethan already knew part of the truth. The rest was waiting for her to confess. "There's no one," Lena said quickly. "You're imagining things." Ethan stepped forward 1 pace. "Look me in the eyes and say it again." Lena swallowed hard. She looked at him, then at the bed, then back at him. Her hand gripped her own wrist as if she were trying to hold herself together. "Ethan," she began, her voice starting to shake. "We've been married 23 years. You really think I'm that kind of woman?" "I don't want to think," Ethan replied, "but I need the truth." Lena exhaled sharply, then pulled out the chair beside the bed and sat down. Her shoulders curled inward like someone trapped in a corner. She still did not cry, but her eyes turned glossy. Lena started, I just felt invisible. These past years, you've always been busy. The kids are grown. They don't need me anymore. I feel like a shadow in this house. Ethan heard her, but it did not soften him the way it once might have. Not because he did not understand. He understood too well. He had watched Lena fade little by little. But he also knew loneliness was not a license to betray. I'm asking you again, is there someone else? Ethan pressed each word. Lena stayed silent. Ethan looked at her, his gaze so cold it made Lena afraid. Not afraid of being hit. Ethan had never been that man. She feared something else. She feared this man might walk out of her life with calmness, and nothing would ever pull him back. You're overreacting, Lena whispered. You just saw the statement and started assuming things. Ethan tilted his head slightly, like that sentence confirmed everything. So, you admit I have the statement, Ethan said. You know what I saw, and you still plan to lie? Lena froze. Her eyes widened. The way Ethan said statement told her he was not only suspecting, he already had evidence. Ethan walked to the closet, opened a drawer, and took out the receipt he had found. He did not wave it like proof in court. He simply placed it on the bed next to the 3 envelopes. Lena saw the line. D, table by the window. Her face went completely pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. Ethan spoke quietly, almost without anger now, only exhaustion deep into his bones. I don't need a long explanation, Ethan said. I just want to know his name. Lena lowered her head, her shoulders trembled, and for the first time tears fell. Ethan, please, she cried, her voice breaking. Name, Ethan repeated. Lena shook, gripping the hem of her shirt like she was trying to hold on to the last piece of dignity she had left. She let out a long breath, then whispered so softly it was almost like she did not want the world to hear it. Derek. Ethan stood still. No expression. But inside him, something collapsed. Derek Vaughn. One name, and every memory in his head shifted. The company party. The man who always smiled. The familiar confidence of someone who knew women would soften for him. Ethan stared at Lena, his voice low and firm like a nail being driven in. How long? Lena cried. She did not answer immediately, and that silence answered for her. Outside in the hallway, Ivy lay in her room, eyes wide open in the dark. She could not hear every sentence clearly, but she heard the name. And she knew. Tonight her family had just stepped through a door no one ever wanted to open. The name Derek hung in the bedroom like smoke that would not fade. Ethan Cole did not move right away. He stood there, staring at Lena, and for one brief moment, so short it was almost invisible, he seemed to see 2 women layered inside the same body. Lena from the past, the woman who held Ivy for the first time in the hospital with eyes red from happiness, and Lena in the present, a woman trembling because her secret had been exposed. How long? Ethan asked again, his voice low, not loud but carrying weight. Lena wiped her tears with the back of her hand as if ashamed she was crying. She inhaled, her throat tight. Not long, she whispered. Ethan tilted his head slightly, not in suspicion but in the way a man looks at numbers when he knows they do not balance. When you say not long, what does that mean? Ethan asked. 3 weeks, 3 months, a year? Lena bit her lip. Tears welled again. 4 months, she said, the words so small they sounded forced out of her chest. Ethan closed his eyes for a beat. 4 months, not one reckless mistake, not one weak day. 4 months meant repeated choices. 4 months of choosing secrecy over family. He opened his eyes. There was no surprise left in them now, only something cold and deep. 4 months, Ethan repeated, like he was reading a report. And you still stood here, looked at me, and said I was just assuming things. Lena lowered her head, shoulders curling inward like cold wind was hitting her. I didn't know what to say, she blurted out. I know I was wrong. But you have to understand, I felt empty. For years, you were always busy. The kids grew up, they don't need me anymore. I was like a shadow in this house. These past years you only had work, budgets, schedules. Don't, Ethan cut in, his voice sharp and final. That single word made Lena freeze. It was not a shout, but it slammed like an iron door. Don't make me the reason, Ethan said. If you were lonely, you could have said so. If you needed something, you could have asked. But you had no right to use that to bring another man into our marriage. Lena looked up, eyes red, like she wanted to argue, but she did not have the strength. Ethan stepped toward the bed, picked up the receipt and turned it slightly so Lena could see it. D, table by the window, Ethan read, without emphasis, but each word fell into the wound like drops of acid. What is this? Lena's lips trembled. Just a note. A note for who? Ethan asked, still calm but sharper. For me? Lena did not answer. Ethan put the receipt down, then stared straight at Lena as if trying to see through skin and bone to the truth underneath. I need to know exactly, Ethan said slowly. What did you and Derek do? Lena immediately shook her head. No, not like you think. Ethan frowned, so there was. It wasn't that, Lena rushed, terrified of Ethan's gaze more than any accusation. We just talked, had lunch a few times. He made me feel like I still mattered. Ethan let out a dry sound that was almost a laugh, but not really. Mattered? He repeated. You needed some guy at work to confirm your worth, while the husband you've lived with for 23 years is right here. You don't understand? Lena choked. You're good, but you're too quiet. You don't look at me the way you used to. You don't touch me the way you used to. Ethan heard that, and this time something real flashed in his eyes. Pain. You mean sex? Ethan asked bluntly. Lena flushed, but she did not dodge any more. I mean feeling desired. Ethan nodded slowly. And Derek gave you that. Lena fell silent, but the silence was confession. Ethan stepped closer. His voice dropped lower, dangerous in the way a man becomes dangerous only after he is exhausted from holding himself back. Did you hug him? Lena gave a tiny nod. Kiss? Lena closed her eyes and nodded again, tears streaming down. Ethan stiffened. He thought his heart had already hardened when he read the statements, but hearing the word kiss from Lena's own mouth still felt like someone smashing his chest with a hammer. And after that, Ethan asked, did you sleep with him? Lena broke down harder. No, she cried, shaking her head violently. I swear, we almost, but I stopped. Almost means what? Ethan did not let go. In the car, a hotel, his office? Lena covered her face, her voice falling apart. After the company party, he drove me home. I had been drinking. I was weak. I leaned on him and... Ethan raised his hand, signaling stop. He did not want to hear the image continue, just imagining it already made him nauseous. He turned away slightly and inhaled deeply. In his mind, one part of him, cold and practical, was watching everything like a case file. But deeper down, the primitive part of him wanted to do the most basic thing, destroy what had humiliated him. He turned back, looked at Lena. Do you know what the worst part is? Ethan said. Each word dragged out like it took force. It's not you kissing another man. It's not the almost. It's that you came home, looked me in the face, and still let me believe we were just normal. You slept next to me. You ate dinner with the kids. You let Ivy hug you, and you kept going. Lena cried, shaking her head. I was scared. I was scared if I told you, you would leave me. Ethan looked at her like she was something unfamiliar. I'm standing here, Ethan said, and you still lied? In that bedroom, their 23-year marriage felt like a glass jar dropped onto the floor. It did not shatter instantly, but it cracked into hundreds of thin lines that could never be restored to its original form. Ethan walked to the bed, took the 3 envelopes, and did not throw them. Did not tear them, he simply placed them on the dresser like a verdict already signed. "That one is a separation agreement," Ethan said. "A post-nup to protect my assets, and divorce papers." Lena stared, her face drained of all color. You prepared all of that?" she whispered. "You plan to leave me without saying anything?" Ethan did not avoid her eyes. "I planned to protect myself before you could make me look like an idiot." Lena sobbed. "I don't want to lose you." Ethan looked straight at her. And this was the heaviest moment of all, the point where there was no room left for pretty words. "You lost me the moment you chose Derek," Ethan said. "The question now is whether you have anything left that's worth me considering keeping." Lena trembled as she stood up, stepping closer to Ethan. She did not dare touch him. She only stood there at a distance, like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. "I'll do anything," Lena said, her voice pleading but not fake. "I'll cut him off. I'll transfer departments. I'll sign anything you want. I'm only begging you, don't let the kids hate me. Don't take Ivy away from me." Ethan heard Ivy's name, and his heart tightened. He did not want Ivy to grow up in a broken home, but he also did not want Ivy to grow up watching her father become the kind of man who accepts betrayal only because he is afraid of change. Ethan pulled out the chair and sat down. A small action, but it gave Lena hope, because at least he was not walking out of the room. He exhaled slowly. "Listen," Ethan said. "I won't tell the kids right now, but you need to understand I don't trust you anymore. And trust isn't something you beg for and get." Lena nodded over and over, tears soaking her shirt. Ethan stood up, took the separation envelope and put it into Lena's hands. "Sign it whenever you want," Ethan said. "I'm not forcing you, but I'm not going back to being the husband I used to be." Lena clutched the envelope like a lifeline. "I understand," she whispered. Ethan opened the bedroom door and looked out into the dark hallway. Across the hall, Ivy's door was slightly open. He knew she was still awake. She always stayed awake whenever the air in the house felt wrong. Ethan did not walk into his daughter's room yet. He paused for a second, then turned back and looked at Lena one last time that night. "One more thing," Ethan said quietly. "If you're still hiding anything, even one detail, it ends immediately. No more paperwork, no more talking." Lena looked at him, eyes red but sincere. "I'm not hiding any more," she said, "I swear." Ethan nodded without speaking. He walked out of their bedroom and went straight to his office. The door closed behind him with a small click, but it sounded like a period at the end of an era. Inside his office, Ethan sat down and opened his phone. Messages from Lena were already coming in one after another. Long apologies, explanations, promises. He did not read all of them. He only stared at one line that stood out on the screen. "I'll sign everything. I'm just begging you not to leave me." Ethan set the phone on the desk, folded his hands together and lowered his head. Somewhere in the house, Ivy lay in the darkness, her pillow wet with tears. She did not understand every word adults were saying, but she understood one thing. From today on, her family would never be the same again. After that night, the Cole house became a place with sounds but no warmth. Mornings still had the coffee machine, the fridge door opening and closing, the scrape of Noah's chair at the kitchen table, the rustle of Ivy digging through her backpack for notebooks. But inside all those familiar sounds, something was clearly missing. The ease, the naturalness. Ethan didn't talk much. He still played his role as a father exactly as before. He drove Ivy to school, reminded Noah not to stay up too late, FaceTimed Madison every Sunday night, his voice steady like the dad who was always there. But with Lena, he became a wall. And Lena didn't try to break it. She didn't beg in front of Ethan. She didn't cling to him with tears. She moved through the house like someone living in a place that no longer belonged to her. Every time Ethan stepped into the kitchen, Lena automatically shifted to the side, making space, like a renter who accidentally ran into the homeowner. They slept in separate rooms. Ethan moved downstairs into his office, laying out a thin guest mattress. He didn't want to lie in their marital bed anymore. Every corner of the blanket felt like it held a memory, and those memories were no longer warm, they were knives. On the second day after the confrontation, Ethan received a long message from Lena at 2:18 a.m. It was all text, no emojis, no polished sentences, just a woman writing as if racing against collapse. "I'm sorry. I know I destroyed everything. I won't justify it anymore. I just want you to know I ended it with Derek. I'll transfer departments. I'll even quit if I have to. I don't need the house. I don't need the car. I don't need the name Cole. I'm only begging you for one thing. Don't let the kids see me as a monster." Ethan read half of it, then stopped. Not because he didn't care, but because the more he read, the tighter his chest felt, like it was being squeezed. Lena was begging with something Ethan didn't want to accept, desperation. He didn't reply. On the third day, another message came. "You can hate me. I accept that. But please don't stay silent forever. Just say one sentence so I know you're still there." Ethan still didn't reply. Not because he wanted to punish her, but because he didn't know what to say without breaking himself. If he said, "I'm fine," it would be a lie. If he said, "I'm hurting," Lena would cling to it like hope. If he said, "It's over," then one day he would have to hear his children cry. Ethan hated uncertainty, but this was what betrayal created, a blind zone where no choice was clean. During those days, Ivy was the one who felt everything the clearest. She didn't know who Derek was. She only knew that name made her mother cry. She only knew her father was sleeping downstairs in the office. She only knew dinner had become shorter and quieter, like everyone was afraid to speak one more sentence. Ivy started doing small things no one asked for, clearing the table faster, hugging her mother longer, asking her father if he wanted more coffee. She was trying to stitch a torn shirt with hands that were too small. One night, as Ethan turned off the light in his office to go to sleep, his phone vibrated again. Another message from Lena. "I'll sign everything." Ethan sat up, his heart beating hard. He read it carefully. "I'll sign anything you put in front of me. I'm only asking to keep one thing, to stay as a mother, even if you no longer want me as a wife." Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't know what to call the feeling. It wasn't victory, it wasn't relief. It felt like a sudden drop, because he had prepared himself for war, for arguments, for Lena to fight back. He thought he would have to stand firm. But if Lena didn't fight, then who would be the villain in this story? The next morning, Ethan went to work as usual. He met with the executive team, reviewed operational reports, resolved a delayed shipment issue in Tacoma. Everything at the company still ran on logic, but in Ethan's head, those clean numbers meant nothing. He kept remembering Lena standing by the bed that night, eyes red, hands trembling, and the name Derek like a stain that would never wash out. That afternoon, Seattle rain fell heavier. Ethan got home close to 6:30. The kitchen light was on. The smell of chicken soup drifted faintly. Noah was in the living room. Ivy was upstairs doing homework. Lena was not in the kitchen, and that felt strange to Ethan. Even when they were cold, Lena still tried to keep the household rhythm. Ethan stepped in, and then he saw what was placed right in the center of the kitchen table. A large, cream-colored envelope. No tape, no decoration, but placed very neatly, like something prepared in silence for a long time. Ethan walked over, his heartbeat slowing down, like his body was lowering speed to prepare for pain. He opened the envelope. Inside were 3 stacks of papers. The separation agreement, the postnuptial agreement, the divorce filing. All of them were signed with Lena Cole's name in every required place. The handwriting was not shaky, not messy. It was straight and clear, like a decision. Ethan stood frozen. He flipped through each page, as if trying to find a trick, as if it couldn't be real. But there was no trick, only signatures. There was also a handwritten letter, folded into thirds, the paper slightly wrinkled as if it had been clenched in someone's hand for too long. Ethan opened the letter. Lena's handwriting appeared, not the sweet style of greeting cards, but the handwriting of someone writing while her heart was falling apart. Ethan, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't deserve it. I'm signing everything because I want you to know this. I will not cling to property, titles, or anything to keep you through the law. I only want to keep one last chance, not to be your wife, but to still be part of your life in whatever way you allow. I was wrong. I won't justify it anymore. If you want me to leave, I will leave. But please, don't make Ivy and Noah choose sides. And please, if you can, remember that I once was a woman who truly loved you. That last line made Ethan choke. Not because it was touching like a movie, but because it reminded him Lena still knew right from wrong. She still understood the value of family. And that made the betrayal hurt more, because it wasn't because she was evil. It was because she was weak. Ethan set the letter down on the table. Both his hands braced against the edge of the kitchen counter. For a few seconds, he felt like he couldn't breathe. Noah looked over from the living room and saw his father's face. He stood up. "Dad?" "What happened?" Noah asked. For the first time, his voice truly carried concern. Ethan, startled, as if pulled back from a cliff. He quickly folded the letter and shoved it into the envelope. "Nothing," Ethan said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Go to your room." Noah looked at the envelope, looked at his father, then nodded quietly and went upstairs. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the 3 signatures on the papers. He had thought he wanted this. He had prepared for it. He had even built the truth folder like a defense system. But now that everything was in front of him, signed neatly, handed back like a surrender, Ethan didn't feel like he had won. He only felt one raw truth. A woman he once trusted was cutting herself out of his life with her own hands. And the scariest part was, she was doing it in silence. Ethan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. At that exact moment, his phone vibrated. A message from Lena. Only one single line. "I didn't dare watch you sign. So I left it there. I'm sorry." Ethan stood still, watching the rain tap against the window. In that moment, he realized the real battle wasn't in the paperwork. It was here, in one question, whether he still loved her enough to suffer more, or whether he would choose to end it, so he wouldn't have to live in suspicion for the rest of his life. The 3 envelopes were signed like a period at the end of a sentence, but the future was still a question mark. From the day the signed envelope appeared on the kitchen table, the Cole house shifted into a different kind of silence. It was no longer the tense, tight silence that came right after the confrontation. It became a heavy, stubborn silence, like a bruise that had turned deep purple. It didn't sting every second anymore, but the moment you touched it, it reminded you it was still there. Ethan stored all the paperwork inside the safe in his office. He locked it, then put the key into a coated drawer. Part of him wanted to keep control. Another part of him wanted to pretend that if he didn't see those pages, then it hadn't truly happened yet. But life didn't work that way. Morning still came on time. Ivy still had to go to school. Noah still had to eat breakfast. Utility bills still arrived on schedule. Ivy's grandmother still called asking whether they would come over for dinner this weekend. The family kept operating, like a car with a cracked frame that still rolled forward because no one had any other option. Ethan moved fully into the office. A thin mattress lay beside the desk. His closet was still in the bedroom, but he only went in to grab clothes when Lena wasn't there. Their movements became like two strangers trying not to bump into each other in a narrow hallway. Lena didn't try to talk. She didn't mention Derek. She didn't repeat "I'm sorry" anymore. She seemed to understand that the word had become like a nail, hammering deeper into a wound that was already open. Instead, she worked. The kitchen was cleaner than usual. The clothes were folded flat, stacked in color-coded piles. Bills were paid on time with small sticky notes on the fridge. Internet paid, gas bill paid. She cooked regularly, but if Ethan didn't come down to eat, she didn't call him. She placed his portion in the fridge and wrote his name in black marker. Those things weren't for show. They looked like a person kneeling down to pick up every piece of shattered glass she had dropped herself, even if her hands were bleeding, without complaining. Ivy saw everything. She hadn't heard the full conversation the other night, but she saw her father sleeping in the office. She saw her mother crying in the bathroom. She felt the distance between two adults turning the house into something unfamiliar. Ivy began doing something very childish, yet painfully mature. She tried to hold the house together. At dinner, Ivy talked more. She told stories about class, teachers, friends, a girl who got caught cheating on a science test, even a stray cat near the school parking lot. She laughed louder than normal, like she was trying to cover the cold wind inside the house. She hugged her mother longer. She stayed closer to her father. Once, Ivy saw Ethan pouring coffee and she walked over, gently tugging the hem of his shirt. "Dad, please eat dinner," Ivy said. "I want our whole family to eat together." Ethan looked at his youngest daughter, his eyes softening for a second. He nodded. "Okay, I'll come down." Upstairs, Noah disappeared deeper and deeper into headphones and screens. He didn't ask. He didn't interfere. He didn't let anyone pull him out of the safe world of games. That was how Noah survived. Madison called home more often, as if she could sense something through her mother's voice. But Lena always said, "Everything's fine, just focus on school." On the 6th night after Lena signed the papers, Ethan returned home after a long day. It got dark early. The rain fell steadily. The house smelled of chicken soup and warm bread. Ethan stood in the kitchen, watching Lena wash her hands. She didn't turn around. Inside Ethan's head, one question had been rolling over and over for days. A question he hated asking, because even asking it was a humiliation. But Ethan also understood that if he wanted to decide the future, he had to know what kind of ground he was standing on. "Lena," Ethan called. Lena stopped. "Yes?" Ethan looked straight at her back. No detour. His voice like he was asking about a routine medical checkup. "I want you to get tested." The water stopped running. Lena turned slowly, her eyes widening as if she'd been slapped. "Tested? For what?" she asked, even though she already knew. "Disease," Ethan said, "STDs." That word made Lena's face drain of color. She froze, her hands clenched together as if she'd been dragged straight back into hell. You still think Lena started, her voice cracking. Ethan didn't lower his gaze. "I'm not thinking. I'm not guessing. I need certainty." Lena swallowed hard. She looked at Ethan like he was a stranger. "I already told you," she whispered. "There wasn't anything more than what I confessed." Ethan nodded, but he didn't soften. "I'm not in a position to trust words anymore," he said. "If you're telling the truth, the results will prove it. If you're lying, then I'll know." Lena stood still for several seconds. The hurt showed clearly on her face. But then she didn't argue. She only exhaled. "Okay," Lena said, her voice empty. "I'll go." Not one word of resistance. 2 days later, Lena came home close to 4 in the afternoon. Ivy was still at school. Noah was in the living room. Ethan was in his office taking a company call. When he stepped out, he saw Lena in the kitchen holding a white envelope. She placed it on the table. "Here," Lena said. No explanation. No long eye contact. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was the lab result. The word negative printed clearly. Ethan stared at the paper longer than necessary. He felt like he should have been relieved, but there was no real relief, because the test only answered one small question, while the biggest question remained empty. How long could she keep lying again? He folded the paper and put it into a drawer. Lena stood still, as if waiting for Ethan to say something. But Ethan didn't speak. He only nodded slightly, then turned away. Lena watched him, her eyes reddening, but she swallowed her tears. She turned back to the stove and continued cooking like a person who had learned to live with silence as punishment. That night, Ivy came home and saw her parents eating together. The girl seemed to feel lighter for a moment, even though the two adults still spoke very little. Ivy talked about school. Lena smiled. Ethan nodded. Noah ate quickly and went upstairs. In that moment, the house looked like it was pretending to be normal, but Ivy could still feel it. The thread between her parents was no longer the same. It had stretched thinner, and if anyone pulled too hard, it could snap. In the days that followed, Lena changed even more, not through words, but through actions. One day, she drove Ivy to school instead of Ethan, so Ethan could sleep longer. She fixed the garage door hinge that had been sticking. She cleaned out the garage that Ethan had been putting off for a year. She wrote down every expense clearly and placed it on the table. Everything is here. No hiding. Each small thing felt like a brick being laid back into place from the beginning. And Ethan stayed like a man standing outside his own house. He returned to the gym. He went earlier than usual. He ran on the treadmill until sweat blurred his vision, as if only exhaustion could make him forget the words Derek, table by the window. He received a few invitations to go drink beer after work. Normally, Ethan would refuse to go home to family, but now he nodded yes. He chose anything that kept him from returning to a house full of memories. A coworker joked, "You've been more relaxed lately, huh?" Ethan gave a small smile and didn't answer, because if he spoke the truth, it wouldn't be a joke anymore. One night, when Ethan came home late, the kitchen was dark except for a small lamp. On the table was the meal Lena had left for him, tightly wrapped in foil. A small note read, "I don't expect you to forgive me quickly. I just want you to know I'm trying every day." Ethan stared at the words. His hand stiffened. The anger wasn't as strong anymore, but what replaced it was even more dangerous: hesitation. Because Ethan started seeing Lena as more than just a betrayer. She was also a woman who was breaking and struggling to stand up again. And that confused him more than any evidence ever had. Ethan understood a truth he didn't want to admit. Some wounds don't kill you immediately. They remain. And they force people to choose, either leave to avoid pain or stay and learn how to live with that pain. That night, Ethan lay on the thin mattress in his office, his eyes on the ceiling. In the next room, Lena also lay still awake. Both of them were awake in the same house, separated by only one wall. But the distance between them now felt as long as an entire lifetime. Ethan Cole was almost never at home that week. Not in the sense of abandoning his responsibilities. He still drove Ivy to school some mornings, still texted Noah reminders to eat dinner on time, still answered Madison's calls with the same steady voice of a father who was always present. But Ethan avoided staying in the house any longer than necessary. He began working late, running at night, accepting extra meetings that seemed harmless on the surface, anything that pulled him out of the home where silence carried Lena's shape. Lena didn't complain. She understood that the distance was a punishment she had created herself. But in Ethan's heart, that distance wasn't only punishment. It was a way to protect himself from moments of softness, the moments when he might look at Lena and remember the past, then hate himself for still caring. On Thursday, a company email arrived. Year-end holiday party, downtown Seattle ballroom, Friday, 7 p.m. A party Ethan had always hated. Loud music, wine, office smiles, Polite, small talk, slick as paint. He used to make excuses to go home to his family, but this time the party felt like a door, a chance for Ethan to test the boundary. He didn't tell Lena he was going. He didn't ask. He didn't discuss it. He simply laid his suit on the bed in the office as if it was a decision unrelated to marriage. Friday afternoon, Seattle was colder than usual. Ivy got out early because the school had an end-of-year activity. The girl stepped into the house and saw her father wearing a white shirt and a tie. "Dad, where are you going dressed up like that?" Ivy asked, her eyes lighting up, but there was caution inside them. Ethan hesitated. He had planned to go alone. But then he looked at Ivy, a child who had been trying to hold the family together, trying to hold her parents, and he realized that if he went with an empty heart, he might do something stupid just to feel like he still had value. Ethan bent down and adjusted Ivy's hair. "I'm going to the company party," he said. "Do you want to come with me?" Ivy's eyes widened. "I can go?" "There's a family area. Food, desserts," Ethan said, trying to make it sound normal. "I want you to come." Ivy didn't know the deeper reason, but she nodded quickly. "I'm coming." Lena stood on the staircase and heard it. She stepped down, her expression shifting slightly when she saw Ethan say nothing to her, but take Ivy with him. Part of her hurt, but she had no right to be jealous, no right to ask. "Wear something warm," Lena said to Ivy gently. Ivy ran upstairs to change. Lena remained standing, looking at Ethan, hesitating like she wanted to say something. Ethan didn't turn away. He didn't step closer either. He stood there, looking at Lena with a calmness that was almost cold. Lena swallowed. "Have fun," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." Just one word, but to Lena it felt like a sheet of ice sliding past her without touching. The downtown ballroom looked like another world. Chandeliers hung high, tables were covered with white cloth, wine glasses were lined up neatly. Soft jazz played on a small stage. Ethan's co-workers were dressed up, laughing loudly, clinking glasses, taking pictures. The scent of perfume, mixed with cocktails and grilled food, became the signature atmosphere of events people attended just to be seen. Ivy walked beside Ethan, wearing a simple dress and a cardigan. She looked around like she was watching a movie, but her eyes never stayed away from her father for long. Ethan shook hands with a few people and received polite compliments. A CFO like you showing up to a party is rare. He smiled, nodded, and kept his mind unreadable. After a while, Ethan stood near the non-alcoholic drink counter for Ivy. She took a soda. Ethan took water. And then a woman appeared. Tessa Lane. Tessa was a senior sales employee, attractive, confident, and overly playful, especially after drinking. She had a reputation for flirting with most stable men in the company, as if it were a sport. "Ethan Cole," Tessa called out, stepping closer, her hand lightly touching his arm as if by accident. "Oh my God, you look different. You've been hitting the gym hard lately, huh?" Ethan stiffened slightly. He didn't like that kind of casual, physical contact, but he stayed polite. "Hi, Tessa," he said. "I came with my daughter." Tessa looked at Ivy and smiled. "Oh, wow, is this the little princess? You're adorable." Ivy responded politely, but her eyes immediately shifted back to Tessa's hand resting on her father's arm. Ethan noticed Ivy's look. He was about to step back a little, but at that exact moment a thought flashed through his mind like a spark. If I also do something wrong, then Lena will understand what this feels like. That thought lasted only a second, but it was long enough for Ethan to realize how dangerous the wound had become. It didn't only hurt him, it was trying to drag him into the mud. Tessa laughed loudly and leaned closer. "You know," she said, stretching the words out, "I've always thought men like you are exactly the kind of men women would fight over." Ethan looked at Tessa. He could see the intention clearly, and he could see just as clearly that here, under lights and music, nobody cared about morality. Everything could be covered with a smile. Tessa moved even closer, the scent of alcohol on her breath. Her hand slid down to Ethan's forearm. Behind them, Ivy stood still like a statue. Her brows tightened. It wasn't childish jealousy, it was the alertness of a child guarding her family from anything that could break it further. Ethan saw Ivy, and that look pulled him back. He gently removed Tessa's hand from his arm. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, polite but firm. "I have to go find my daughter." Tessa gave an awkward laugh, not used to being rejected. "Oh, okay, Mr. Perfect Dad." Ethan didn't respond. He turned to Ivy. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Ivy nodded, but her eyes still followed Tessa. "Yes." Ethan took Ivy's hand and led her away from the crowd. They stood on a small balcony looking down at the street. Cold wind hit their faces and made Ethan feel more awake. After a while, they left. In the car, Ivy stayed quiet for a long time. Ethan knew she was processing what she had seen. He also knew she was afraid to ask. Ethan drove across the bridge, city lights reflecting on the water. The windshield wipers moved steadily. The atmosphere felt like a silent interrogation room. Ivy finally spoke, her voice very small. "Dad." "Yeah," Ethan answered, eyes still on the road. Ivy swallowed. "That woman, does she like you?" Ethan exhaled. "Maybe." Ivy stayed quiet for a few seconds, then asked a question that made Ethan tighten his grip on the steering wheel. "Do you like her?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. His heart pounded. He felt as if Ivy had placed a mirror in front of him and forced him to look at what he was avoiding. "No," Ethan finally said. Ivy looked at him, checking for truth. Then, "Do you still love Mom?" That question dropped into the car like a stone into a lake. No explosion, but waves that kept spreading. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to answer no, to end the pain cleanly, but he couldn't, because if he didn't love her at all anymore, he would have filed for divorce already. He would have kicked Lena out of the house. He would have told Madison and Noah. But he hadn't done any of it. Ethan stayed silent. And Ivy understood. A smart child understood that sometimes adults stay silent not because they have no answer, but because the answer is too real. Ethan glanced at Ivy. Her expression was sad but determined. "I don't want our home to break," Ivy said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan felt his heart twist, hurting more than when he heard Derek's name. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "I don't want that either." Ivy nodded and looked out the window. Rainwater stretched into bright lines. Ethan drove home, but inside his mind, a truth had just been carved deep. If he used betrayal to get revenge, he wouldn't only destroy Lena. He would destroy Ivy, the child who still believed her father was the safest place in the world. And in that moment, Ethan understood that the line between victim and someone who causes pain was only one bad decision away on a weeknight. He had stood at the edge. But Ivy's eyes had pulled him back. After the year-end party, Ethan Cole no longer looked at his house the same way. Not because everything suddenly became better, but because Ivy's question had touched a deep place inside him that he had tried to hide. That question wasn't advice, it was a warning. Don't turn pain into something that destroys your children. Ethan was still cold, still kept his distance, but that coldness was no longer sharp like a blade. It began to feel like thin ice, and thin ice can crack under a little warmth. Lena noticed first. She didn't ask Ethan how he felt after the party. She didn't ask whether he had someone else. Lena understood that she no longer had the right to question Ethan's morality. All she could do was live correctly each day, like someone paying back a debt through actions. One evening in the middle of the week, Noah went to a friend's house to play games. Ivy went to bed early because she had a math test tomorrow. The house was rarely this empty, but that night it felt open like a breath. Ethan sat in the living room with only one small lamp lit in the corner. In his hands was an old book about financial management, the kind of thing he read to keep his mind in a safe zone. But tonight he couldn't get through a single page. Soft footsteps came down the stairs. Lena appeared, not in pajamas but in a beige sweater, her hair tied low. In her hands were 2 cups, hot cocoa for herself, black tea for Ethan. She placed Ethan's cup on the coffee table carefully. "You still drink it without sugar, right?" Lena asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the cup like he was looking at a memory, because for years Lena had always remembered that detail. Ethan drank it black, no sugar, no milk. Little things like that had once kept them together. He picked up the cup and took a sip. He didn't speak. But to Lena, that was already an answer. They sat like that for several minutes, the air not heavy, just quiet. A different kind of quiet than before. Not quiet from anger, but quiet because both of them were afraid to say the wrong thing. Lena broke it first with something unrelated. "Today, I passed by that old video store on 8th Avenue, she said softly. "I remembered how you used to rent movies. That movie you made me watch 3 times. Ethan's mouth curved slightly. "You hated that movie." "I didn't hate it," Lena said, a small smile appearing, then fading. "I hated it because you always picked those old weird films." Ethan let out a very small laugh, so small it barely counted as laughter, but enough to make Lena freeze for a second, afraid that if she breathed too hard, the sound would disappear. She looked at Ethan, her eyes soft. "Thank you," Lena said. Ethan turned his head and looked at her longer than usual for the first time. "Thank you for what?" "For not telling the kids," Lena replied, her voice trembling but not crying. "I know if they knew they wouldn't look at me the same anymore." Ethan stayed silent. Lena lowered her gaze, her hands clasped together. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. I'm grateful you still kept Ivy peaceful." Ethan looked down at the cup, then gave a very small nod. That night ended without anyone saying "I love you" or apologizing again, but something had changed. Ethan didn't stand up and walk away. He stayed. And Lena understood that sometimes staying was hope. In the days that followed, they began having small moments that were never named. After dinner, Ethan washed dishes with Lena once, for the first time in weeks. They stood side by side, their hands brushing by accident. Lena flinched slightly, afraid Ethan would be uncomfortable. But Ethan didn't pull away. He just kept washing the plate as if nothing had happened. Another night, Ethan and Lena walked together around the neighborhood. No one suggested it. They just stepped outside like they had years ago when the children were still small. Suburban Seattle homes glowed with warm lights. Wet fallen leaves clung to the sidewalk. The scent of pine drifted in the cold wind. They walked in silence for a long stretch. But this time, the silence didn't press down. It simply existed like an empty space for both of them to breathe. Lena spoke first, looking toward houses already decorated with early Christmas lights. "I still dream," she said quietly, "that this Christmas all 3 kids are home. Madison comes back, Noah stops shutting his door. Ivy doesn't have to pretend to be happy anymore." Ethan didn't look at her, but his words weren't cold. "That doesn't depend only on you," he said. Lena nodded. "I know." They kept walking. At one point, they saw 2 teenagers laughing beside an old car. Lena looked at them, then instinctively touched Ethan's hand, a very quick, very natural touch, as if she forgot the boundary for a second. She immediately pulled back, scared. But Ethan didn't avoid her. He didn't react negatively. He only slowed his pace slightly so Lena could walk beside him. That moment made Lena bite her lip to keep from crying. Because in that moment, she felt she hadn't been pushed out of his life completely yet. Then the anniversary arrived. 23 years. A number that sounded like an entire lifetime. Ethan woke early as usual, made coffee, and sat alone at the kitchen table. On the wall calendar there was a red circle, anniversary. Before, that day always had at least something small, a flower, a card, or dinner out. But this year, the atmosphere felt like an ordinary day trying to pretend it was ordinary. Madison called at noon, cheerful. Happy anniversary to my favorite couple. Ethan thanked her and said nothing more. Lena only gave a weak smile. That afternoon, Ethan came home from work. Gray skies, light rain. When he opened the kitchen door, he saw an envelope placed in the center of the table. A cream-white envelope neatly folded. On the flap was a small sticker, two hands clasped together. Ethan recognized that symbol immediately. It was the drawing Lena had hand-sketched on their wedding invitation 23 years ago, when they were still poor and happy, when the future was still easy to believe in. Ethan stood very still, staring at the envelope like it was a door. He didn't open it right away. He picked it up and turned it gently. On the back it read, "For Ethan. Please read alone." He carried it upstairs to the office and slipped it into his pocket like he was hiding something too important. Ethan showered, changed clothes, then stepped into the hallway looking for Lena. But Lena wasn't home. Ethan walked back downstairs and looked around. No pots, no signs of Lena preparing dinner. The house felt emptier than usual. A small note was stuck to the fridge. "Ivy and Noah are at Aunt Claire's. Dinner is covered." There was no mention of Lena. Ethan felt his heart tighten. Not jealousy, not anger, but a deep unease, the kind that appears only when trust has already been broken. He stood by the window and looked at the driveway. Lena's car wasn't there. He checked the clock. 6:12 p.m. An hour passed, and still no car. Ethan tried to stay calm, but in his head Derek returned like a ghost, even though Lena had said it was over, even though she had signed the papers, even though she had changed. Trust still wasn't enough. Ethan sat down at the table and took out the envelope. He placed it in front of him. His hand rested on the flap, but he didn't tear it yet. And then, at exactly 8:07 p.m., Ethan's phone rang. An unknown number. Ethan answered, his voice already tight. "Hello?" On the other end was a woman's voice, professional and emotionless, like someone calling from a hospital. "Is this Mr. Ethan Cole?" Ethan felt the blood in his body turn cold. "Yes. We're calling from Harborview Medical Center. Your wife, Lena Cole, was brought into the emergency room after a traffic accident. She is unconscious but stable. We need you to come immediately." For 1 second, Ethan didn't understand what the sentence meant. He thought he had misheard. Then his heart clenched violently. "An accident," he stammered. Is she okay?" "She is currently being monitored. There was a strong impact, abrasions, possible shoulder injury. We are keeping her for observation due to signs of a mild concussion. But we need a family member present." Ethan asked nothing else. He threw on his coat, grabbed his keys, and ran outside. As he sped out of the driveway, the anniversary envelope was still in his pocket, pressed against his chest like a cruel reminder. Sometimes people only understand they still love someone when they're about to lose them. That Seattle night was cold enough to cut skin as Ethan Cole drove as fast as he could. Streetlights stretched into blurred golden streaks on the rain-soaked windshield. The wipers moved non-stop, steady like a heartbeat trying to keep him from breaking. Ethan didn't remember how many yellow lights he ran. He only remembered his hands gripping the steering wheel until it hurt, and one meaningless sentence repeating in his mind like a curse. Not possible, not tonight. Harborview Medical Center appeared ahead like a cold concrete block. The parking lot was nearly full. Ethan cut the engine, jumped out, and ran through the automatic doors. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of announcements hit him like a different world, a world of people who only meet when something bad happens. The ER reception area was crowded. A young nurse asked for the name. Ethan said it fast, almost breathless. "Lena Cole, accident. I'm her husband." Hearing himself say husband, Ethan felt his throat tighten. Only weeks ago he had prepared paperwork to end that word, and now he was holding on to it like the only ticket that allowed him to step inside. The nurse nodded, checked the computer, then pointed down the hallway. "Room 12. She's being monitored. The doctor will speak with you." Ethan moved so fast his shoes clicked sharply on the tile. When he reached room 12 and looked through the small glass window, his heart stopped for a beat. Lena was lying there. Her face was pale, hair messy, a bandage on her forehead. Her left shoulder was wrapped, her arm resting in a brace. The monitor numbers blinked beside her. She was breathing, but lightly. In that moment, Derek, the statements, the 3 signed envelopes all felt distant, like another lifetime. The only thing left was the face of the woman Ethan had held for more than 20 years. A doctor approached, middle-aged, voice solid. "Mr. Ethan Cole?" Ethan turned. "Yes." "The accident is not too serious," the doctor said. "She has bruising on the shoulder, abrasions, and dizziness from the impact. We're keeping her for observation due to mild concussion signs. But overall, she should be okay." Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What caused the crash?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. The doctor looked at the report. According to the statement, she swerved to avoid a dog running across the road. She lost control and hit the barrier. Fortunately, her speed wasn't very high. Ethan nodded, his throat still tight. He thanked the doctor and entered the room. Inside, the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the air. Ethan pulled a chair and sat beside the bed. He didn't touch Lena right away. He only looked at her, as if he needed to make sure she was truly still here. Under the cold white hospital light, Lena looked smaller than she did at home. She was no longer the stubborn woman hiding a secret. She was simply a human being, fragile like anyone else. Ethan leaned forward and looked at the bandage on her forehead. An old memory rushed in. The night Madison was born early, Lena pale with pain but still smiling as she said, "As long as we're still together." Ethan thought he had forgotten that. But he hadn't. Truly important things do not disappear. They only get buried under pain. The anniversary envelope in Ethan's pocket pressed against his chest like something alive. He took it out and placed it on his lap. At this moment, he no longer had any reason to delay. This envelope could be the last thing Lena had left behind before the crash. And Ethan didn't want to live with another secret. He tore it open. Inside were 2 sheets. The first page was written clearly, Lena's handwriting strong and straight. "Ethan, if you are reading this, it means you still have enough patience to listen to me one more time. I am not writing this to ask for a second chance. I do not have the right to demand that. I only want to give you the final part of the truth. I was completely wrong. I let my own emptiness control the stupidest decisions of my life. If you choose divorce and close this door forever, I will respect it. But if there is still even one piece of the love from all the years we lived inside you, I want the chance to try to become worthy again, even if only as a woman who stands beside you in silence, asking for nothing more." Ethan read to the end, his hand tightening around the paper. The words didn't sound like Lena begging. They sounded like a clean confession. No blame, no manipulation. The second sheet was an extra note, without a signature, as if Lena didn't dare attach her name to something too real. "I don't deserve you. You've always been a good husband, even when you were quiet. You took care of me when I had postpartum depression. You stood beside me when I lost my father. And I betrayed that, only because I was afraid of aging, afraid of being forgotten, afraid I was no longer a woman. I won't ask you to forget. I only ask you to remember that I am trying to fix it with the rest of my life." Ethan lowered the pages, feeling as if a huge stone dropped straight into his chest. But this time, it wasn't a stone of anger. It was a stone of regret. He looked at Lena. His eyes burned, but Ethan didn't cry out loud. He simply reached out and for the first time in weeks held Lena's hand. That hand was still warm, and that alone was enough to make Ethan understand he wasn't ready to lose her. 2 hours later, Lena stirred slightly. Her eyelids trembled. She opened her eyes slowly, looked at the ceiling, then turned her gaze toward him. When she saw Ethan sitting there, silent, the letter on his lap, Lena froze. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her shoulder and she groaned. Ethan immediately supported her. "Don't," Ethan said quietly. Lena stared at him, her eyes full of fear. Not fear of the accident, but fear of his answer about their marriage. "You," Lena rasped, "you read it?" Ethan nodded. Lena swallowed hard, tears spilling instantly like she had been holding them back for too long. "I'm sorry." Ethan looked at her for a long time. In that moment, he felt two forces fighting inside him, wounded pride and love that hadn't died. And Ethan chose what many men were not brave enough to choose. Not easy forgiveness, but starting again under new terms. He lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair off Lena's forehead, his voice deep, exhausted, but firm like an oath. "We start again," Ethan said. "From zero." Lena broke into sobs. "Ethan!" "Not like before," Ethan continued, his eyes locked on hers. "There's no going back to what we used to be, but if you truly want it, I'll give us a chance to rebuild, day by day." Lena nodded repeatedly, her trembling hand gripping Ethan's hand like someone finding shore after drowning. Ethan held tighter. In the days that followed, Ethan cared for Lena like he was caring for a part of his life he had almost lost. He brought chicken soup, helped with medicine, changed bandages, drove her to follow-ups. No one in the house knew the full truth. Ethan only told Ivy and Noah that their mom had an accident and needed rest, and that Mom and Dad are trying to fix some things. Ivy stared at her father for a long time, then nodded. She didn't ask more. She only hugged her mother tighter. Nothing healed overnight. The betrayal still remained like a scar. But Ethan and Lena began learning how to live again, not through promises but through presence. Less talking, less pretending, and more truth. Because real love isn't always shiny. Sometimes it's torn, dirty, full of mistakes. But if two people choose to pick up each piece and put it back together, it can become something stronger than before. If you were Ethan, would you choose to forgive and rebuild, or walk away to protect your pride? Leave a comment below. I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy life stories filled with marriage drama like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories every week.